Ruby Obi felt numb. Her vision blurred as she stood at the entrance of the Grand Cathedral, her father's firm grip on her arm, the only thing keeping her rooted in place. The air was thick with the scent of expensive roses and the murmurs of high society guests waiting to witness a spectacle. To everyone else, it was the wedding of the year. Two powerful families uniting under the sacred vows of marriage. But to Ruby, it was a funeral. Her own. Her fingers clenched around the bouquet of white lilies, her knuckles turning pale beneath the golden bangles that jingled on her wrists. She barely heard the choir singing, barely noticed the extravagant decorations her mother had insisted on. All she could hear was the roaring anger in her chest, the betrayal burning through her veins. Her father, Chief Obedeka Obi, walked beside her with a face carved from stone, unbothered by the fact that he had just sold his daughter to a man she barely knew. Her mother, Lady Nkechi Obi, sat in the front row, pretending that this was normal, pretending that Ruby hadn't cursed them all earlier that morning, screaming at them for their betrayal. Even her brother Cheek, the one person she thought would stand by her, had turned his back on her, mumbling about how she needed to do what was best for the family. What was best for the family? Marrying a man with a reputation colder than steel? A billionaire with power that stretched across Lagos, feared by even the most ruthless? What did they get in return for selling her like livestock? As she neared the altar, her heartbeat quickened. Jackson Okafor stood there, tall and composed, dressed in a black designer suit. His dark eyes held no warmth, no emotion. A man known for his brutality in business, for making people disappear without a trace. Ruby's breath hitched. No, this wasn't happening. Her father's grip on her arm tightened as they neared the altar. The priest stood ready. The guests waited. Jackson extended his hand. She took a step back. Her father's fingers dug into her skin, a silent warning. Another step back. Murmurs rippled through the church. Another step back. Then, before she could think, she turned and ran. Gasps filled the air. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, her veil flying behind her like a ghostly shadow. The guards at the door hesitated, confused, but she was already pushing past them, the heavy dress slowing her down. "Ruby!" her mother screamed. "Stop her!" her father barked. She ran faster, breathless, heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know where she was going. All she knew was that she had to get out, away from the life they had forced on her, away from Jackson Okafor. But she wasn't fast enough, because just as she reached the church doors, a firm, unyielding grip caught her wrist. She whirled around, eyes wide, and there he was. Jackson Okafor, unshaken, unmoved, unstoppable. "You can run, wife," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "But you can't escape me." Ruby ran until her lungs burned, until her wedding gown became nothing but a weight dragging behind her. She didn't care. She didn't care about the whispers, the murmurs of Lagos high society. She didn't care that she had just humiliated her family in front of the most powerful people in the city. All she knew was that she had to disappear, and there was only one place she could go. Her grandmother's old house. The place had been empty since Mama Abele passed away a year ago. A small, secluded bungalow on the outskirts of the city, far from the chaos of Banana Island. Far from the lavish prisons her family had built for her. The moment she stepped inside, she locked the door behind her, gasping for air. Dust lingered in the air, but the familiar scent of old wood and worn fabric comforted her. She sank to the ground, wedding gown pooling around her, and let the tears fall. She cried for herself, for the betrayal of the people she once called family, for the life she never got to choose. Exhaustion crept in, and with her face buried in her arms, she fell into a deep, restless sleep. The scent of coffee. Ruby stirred, groggy, her body stiff from sleeping on the floor. The aroma wrapped around her, warm and inviting. She blinked, sitting up. That's strange. She was the only one here. How a soft clinking noise from the kitchen made her freeze. Heart pounding, she stood slowly, her hands shaking as she crept toward the sound. The house was supposed to be empty. No one knew she was here. No one except She turned the corner, and there he was, Jackson Okafor, standing in her kitchen, in her dead grandmother's house, dressed in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up, as if this were his home. He stirred a cup of coffee casually, as if he hadn't just chased her from the altar less than 24 hours ago. Ruby's breath caught in her throat. He turned to face her, his dark eyes scanning her from head to toe. "Hope you had a good night's sleep," he said, voice calm, deep, unreadable. He set the cup down. "I've come to take you home, wife." The words sent a violent shudder through her body. She clenched her fists. "I ran away," she snapped. "I couldn't possibly be your wife." Jackson exhaled, rubbing his temple like she was a stubborn child. "You are my wife, Ruby." "No." She took a step back. "You don't own me." "Then why are your owners waiting outside?" Her blood ran cold. She turned to the window. Her heart dropped. Her father's black SUV was parked outside, and beside it, her mother stood, arms crossed, and next to her Cian, her brother, the one who had promised to protect her. The door burst open before she could react, and Sean stormed in, his face dark with fury. "You think you can humiliate us, eh?" He grabbed her wrist. "Let me go," Ruby shouted, thrashing, pushing at his chest. "You betrayed me, Sean. You all did." She shoved him hard, but his grip only tightened. And then slap. The impact rang in her ears, her face whipping to the side, stinging with heat. She gasped, shocked, heartbroken. Sean had never hit her before. Her vision blurred with tears as he yanked her towards the door. "You're coming home, whether you like it or not." She struggled, but it was no use. She was thrown into the car, her body colliding with the leather seat. The car door shut, a slow, deliberate movement. Jackson slid in beside her, calm, composed, unaffected. He looked at her with the kind of patience that made her blood boil. Then, leaning closer, he whispered, "You can run, Ruby. You can fight. But in the end, you belong to me." The car pulled away, taking her back to the life she never wanted. The car ride to Jackson Okafor's mansion was silent, except for Ruby's soft, broken sobs. She curled against the door, her heart aching, her body trembling from exhaustion. Her family, her own blood, had sold her off like a mere transaction, as if her feelings meant nothing. Her father sat in the front seat, stone-faced. Her mother looked away, avoiding her gaze. And Sean, her brother, the one she had trusted, remained indifferent, as if he hadn't just struck her across the face in front of her supposed husband. The moment they arrived at Jackson's estate, a massive fortress of wealth and power in the heart of Lagos, her family stepped out, their expressions unreadable. Her father turned to her one last time, his voice cold and final. "You are married now, Ruby. That is final." With that, they drove off, leaving her alone in the belly of the beast. Ruby stood, frozen in place, the weight of her reality crashing down on her. She had fought, she had run, she had begged. But in the end, she was still here, defeated, trapped. Tears welled in her eyes as she walked into the mansion, guided by a silent maid. The house was grand, larger than anything she had ever seen, but to her it felt like a prison. She collapsed onto the bed in the unfamiliar room, her wedding dress still clinging to her body. She didn't bother changing. She didn't bother wiping her tears. She just cried until there was nothing left in her. Until sleep pulled her under, dragging her into the depths of exhaustion. Jackson pushed the bedroom door open quietly, careful not to wake her. She lay curled up on the massive bed, her face buried in the pillows, her wedding dress wrinkled from sleep. Tear stains marked her cheeks, and even in the dim light, he could see the angry red imprint of Sean's hand on her soft skin. His jaw clenched. That slap had angered him more than anything. Nobody was allowed to lay a hand on her. She was his, and if there was ever a price to pay for touching what belonged to him, it would be steep. His fingers brushed over her face, tracing the mark her brother had left. She didn't deserve this. Pulling out the ointment from the bedside cabinet, he uncapped it, gently rubbing it against the bruise. She stirred slightly but didn't wake up. He took his time, his movements precise, almost reverent. He wasn't a man given to softness. He had built his empire through calculated ruthlessness, through dominance and control. But this woman, she was different. He had met her once before, even though she hadn't known him. He had watched her interact with her staff, seen the kindness in her eyes, the effortless beauty she carried. There was something untouched about her, something pure in a world full of corruption. So when her father had come running to him, desperate for protection, begging him to keep his daughter safe from the enemies hunting him down, Jackson had only given one condition: marry her to me. It wasn't just about protecting her. She didn't need to hide. What she needed was an upgrade of her surname, a name that would make her untouchable. With his name, no man would dare harm her. And whether she accepted it or not, she was his now. His wife, his possession, his obsession. Ruby woke up feeling different. The burning pain on her cheek had lessened, and her body felt less stiff, but the heavy weight of betrayal still sat in her chest. She blinked, adjusting to the sunlight peeking through the massive windows. Reality came crashing back. She was still here, still in his house. Her stomach growled in protest, but food wasn't her priority. Getting out was. This wouldn't be her life. Never. She refused to be caged, controlled like some property. If her own family wouldn't fight for her, then she would fight for herself. She needed a plan, and fast. Taking a deep breath, she pushed off the bed and stepped out of the room. The mansion was eerily silent, grand but empty. She wandered through the halls searching for Jackson. If she was going to escape, she needed to start by getting out of the house. And then she found him, in the house gym. The sight of him irritated her more than she wanted to admit. Dressed in black joggers and a fitted sleeveless top, his body was all sculpted muscle and strength. His movements were precise as he worked the weights, completely at ease in his own world. When he noticed her standing there, he smirked. "You can't stand there staring, wife." His voice was smooth, deep, teasing. "If you want something, say so." Her blood boiled. "For the last time, I am not your wife," she snapped, her hands clenching into fists. His smirk didn't waver. He wiped his hands with a towel, then walked to a nearby shelf, pulling out a neatly folded document. Ruby frowned. "What's that?" Jackson held it up, his dark eyes locked on hers. "The marriage certificate." Her heart stopped. She stepped forward, snatching the paper from him. Her hands trembled as she scanned the words. It had all the legal stamps, the official signatures, and her name written in perfect ink at the bottom. Her own signature. Her head snapped up. "This is fake. I never signed this." Jackson tilted his head, amusement flickering in his gaze. "You did." "No, I didn't," she shouted, her frustration reaching its peak. "I would never sign this. How did this happen?" He shrugged. "You think a man like me would go through all this trouble and not make sure everything was legal?" She wanted to scream, to rip the paper into shreds. But deep down, she knew Jackson was a man of power, and men like him didn't play games. He had made sure she belonged to him. Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to stay calm. She had to get out of here, and if she had to play along for now, so be it. "I want to go home," she said, her voice even. Jackson raised an eyebrow. "You are home." "No," she snapped. "I mean my real home. I need to pick up my clothes." He leaned against the wall, arms crossed as if considering. "There's a whole walk-in closet filled with clothes for you upstairs." Of course, he had planned everything. "I want my things," she insisted. He studied her for a long moment, then finally nodded. "Fine, go get dressed. Meet me in the car in 5. Minutes later, she was sitting in the passenger seat of his sleek black sports car, arms crossed, staring out of the window as Jackson drove through the streets of Lagos. He glanced at her from the corner of his eye. She was fuming, her lips pressed into a thin line, her anger radiating off her like heat. But all he could think was how beautiful she looked, even when she was mad. And she was his. The moment Jackson's car came to a stop in front of her family's estate, Ruby wasted no time. She pushed the door open and jumped out before he could even step out himself. She wasn't about to let him play the role of the gentleman, not when she despised everything about this situation. She stormed inside, her heart pounding, her heels clicking against the marble floor with purpose. Jackson followed behind, his presence like a shadow she couldn't shake. As she stepped into the dining area, she froze. Her family was sitting there. Her father, mother, and Sean, eating breakfast as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just sold her off like an asset in a business transaction. They didn't even acknowledge her. The betrayal burned fresh inside her chest, but she refused to let them see how much it hurt. She clenched her jaw and walked straight to her room, slamming the door behind her. Without wasting a second, she pulled out her biggest suitcase and started packing. Her favorite designer shoes, her clothes, everything that belonged to her. But she was careful, making sure to leave behind every single thing that had been gifted to her by her family. She wanted nothing from them, nothing from the people who had betrayed her. As she zipped up the suitcase, she turned to find Jackson leaning casually against the doorframe, watching her. His gaze was unreadable, but there was something sharp in his eyes. "You already have clothes back at our villa," he reminded her smoothly. She glared at him, venom dripping from her voice. "I don't want anything from you." His lips twitched lightly, as if amused by her resistance. But before he could respond, her mother's voice interrupted. "Jackson," Lady Nihechiobi called out sweetly from the dining area, "come have breakfast with us." Ruby stiffened. The audacity, the sheer audacity of this woman to act as if everything was normal. Her fury boiled over, and before Jackson could respond, she marched up to her mother, her eyes blazing. "I don't want anything from you people," she hissed, voice shaking with rage. "I don't want your food. I don't want your fake concern. And I never want to see you again. You are not my family." Her mother's face fell, but Ruby didn't care. She had spent too long being their pawn, being manipulated into a life she didn't choose. Sean, who had been silent until now, scoffed from the table. "You're being dramatic, Ruby. You've always been too spoiled." He didn't get to finish. Jackson barely moved, but the subtle way he lifted his hand, the sharp look in his eyes was enough to silence Sean instantly. Ruby blinked in surprise. Jackson turned his gaze back to her, his voice calm, firm. "Let's go." Without another word, Ruby grabbed her suitcase and walked out. She wasn't just leaving her home. She was leaving them, for good. The car ride was tense. Ruby sat stiffly in the passenger seat, arms crossed, staring out of the window, her mind racing with her plan. She had no time for emotions, no time for anger, no time to think about the man beside her who was determined to own her. She had booked a flight the night before, her one chance to get away. She didn't care what waited for her in Johannesburg. As long as she was far from Jackson Okafor and the betrayal of her family, it was enough. She needed freedom. She needed to breathe. And so she played the part. As they neared a busy supermarket close to the airport, she let out a soft gasp, pressing a hand to her stomach. "Jackson, stop the car!" His brows furrowed slightly as he glanced at her. "What?" "I need to use the restroom," she said hurriedly, shifting uncomfortably. "Now." He hesitated for a second, watching her carefully, but finally he pulled into the parking lot of the supermarket. Without wasting time, she grabbed her shuttle bag, making it seem like she was simply taking her phone and wallet, and rushed out of the car. Jackson waited, and waited. 15 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. His patience wore thin, his jaw tightened, his grip on the steering wheel clenching harder. Something wasn't right. Then his phone rang, one of his planet guards at the airport. "Sir," the man's voice was crisp, urgent. "Your wife is on a flight to Johannesburg." Silence. Jackson didn't move for a moment, letting the words sink in. Then slowly he smirked. Smart girl, but not smart enough. With a calm exhale, he started the engine and drove home. There was no need to chase after her like some desperate fool. By the time he arrived at his mansion, his private jet was already waiting for him, prepped and ready. He took his time, showered, changed into a sleek black suit, and poured himself a drink. Then he stepped onto his jet, ready to bring his runaway bride home. She could run to the ends of the earth. She was still his. Before Jackson's jet left Lagos, he made a call. His voice was smooth, controlled, deadly. "Ezra," he said, speaking to one of his trusted men stationed in Johannesburg, "my wife will be landing soon. I want eyes on her the second she steps off the plane." "Yes, sir," the man responded instantly. Jackson leaned back in his seat, a slow smirk forming on his lips. She thought she could run. She was wrong. The moment Ruby landed in Johannesburg, she let out a deep breath, gripping the handle of her suitcase. She had made it. The airport was buzzing with life, but she ignored the crowds, pulling her phone out to book a ride to a five-star hotel. If she was going to rebuild her life, she needed rest first. As she checked into the luxurious hotel, she felt a slight unease, but she brushed it off. When she paid for her standard room, the receptionist beamed at her. "Congratulations, ma'am. You've been upgraded to a suite. We have an ongoing promo, and you've been randomly selected to receive one of our best rooms at no extra charge." Ruby blinked. "What? That's unexpected," she said cautiously. The receptionist smiled warmly. "You're in luck. Enjoy your stay." Confused but too exhausted to argue, Ruby forced a small smile, thanked them, and took her key. The suite was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a king-sized bed, and a personal jacuzzi. She should have questioned it, but after the past few days, she was too drained to care. By evening, hunger gnawed at her stomach. She hadn't eaten properly in over a day. Dressing in a simple but elegant slip dress, she made her way down to the hotel's lounge. The air smelled of luxury, fine wine, rich spices, and soft jazz playing in the background. She settled into a quiet corner and ordered a full meal and a glass of red wine. For the first time in a while, she relaxed. She was free, or so she thought. After finishing her meal, she called for the bill. The waiter returned with a polite smile and said, "Your bill has already been paid, ma'am." Ruby frowned. "What? By who?" The waiter subtly gestured toward a dimly lit corner of the lounge. Ruby turned her head, and her breath caught in her throat. There, sitting comfortably, sipping a glass of whiskey like he owned the entire city, was Jackson Okafor, his dark eyes locked on hers, an amused smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "Surprised to see me, wife?" he murmured, tilting his glass toward her. Ruby's blood ran cold. She had escaped Lagos. She had crossed borders, and yet here he was, waiting for her. Ruby's blood boiled as she stared at Jackson, seated so calmly in the dimly lit lounge like he belonged there. He wasn't supposed to be here. How had he found her? The moment he stood up and took a step toward her, she pushed back her chair, fury blazing in her eyes. "Get up," Jackson said smoothly, his voice firm yet annoyingly calm. "We're leaving." Ruby's fists clenched. "How did you find me?" she demanded, her heart pounding in her chest. "How, Jackson?" He smirked, slipping his hands into his pockets. "You're mine to keep, Ruby, and I protect what's mine, with everything I have." She inhaled sharply, her nails digging into her palms. "I am not yours, and I will never be yours." Her voice trembled with rage. She had come all this way, yet he was still here, still chasing her down like a possession he refused to let go of. "I suggest you get up before I carry you out of here," Jackson warned, his voice turning dangerously low. Ruby's mind raced. He was powerful, yes, but this was a public place. She had an audience, people who would help her if she screamed. She straightened her shoulders, tilting her chin up. "If you don't leave, I'll scream," she threatened. "I'll tell everyone you're a stalker trying to kidnap me." Jackson merely arched a brow. "Would you?" Without thinking twice, she took a deep breath and let out the loudest scream she could muster. "Help! This man is stalking me! He's trying to kidnap me!" The lounge went silent. Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward them. A concerned elderly couple nearby gasped, their wrinkled hands flying to their mouths. The hotel staff froze, unsure of what to do. Jackson, however, remained completely unbothered. Instead, he let out a long sigh before putting on the most patient husband expression. Turning to the elderly couple, he chuckled lightly and shook his head. I'm so sorry about this, he said smoothly, flashing them an apologetic smile. My wife is throwing a tantrum because I packed her bags for our honeymoon and forgot her favorite lingerie. The couple blinked. Ruby's mouth dropped open. What Jackson continued, completely ignoring her outrage. You know how newlyweds are, he added, shaking his head fondly. She's mad at me, but trust me, she'll get over it. The elderly woman's eyes softened immediately. Oh dear, she sighed, glancing at Ruby. Young love is always like this. You'll learn to forgive your husband's mistakes, sweetheart. The old man chuckled. Ah, let them be, Mary. Every couple has their first big fight during their honeymoon. He turned to Ruby and smiled. Go with your husband, my dear. You'll be just fine. Ruby gaped at them in disbelief. Are you kidding me? And before she could utter another word, Jackson grabbed her, effortlessly throwing her over his shoulder as if she weighed nothing. Jackson, put me down, she shrieked, kicking and pounding at his back, but he didn't even flinch. See? Jackson told the couple with a smirk. She loves making a scene. The entire lounge erupted into soft laughter, amused by the honeymoon drama. Ruby burned with humiliation as Jackson carried her through the hotel like a caveman. She hated him. She despised him. And worst of all, she had no idea how to escape him. The moment they stepped into the suite, Jackson finally dropped her onto the plush bed. Ruby scrambled up immediately, her chest rising and falling with rage. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides as she glared at him. Why won't you just let me be? She hissed, her voice sharp with frustration. What is your problem? Jackson exhaled slowly, as if she was the one being difficult. You already know the answer to that, Ruby, he said, his voice controlled, steady. I'm your husband. You need to stop running. You're being dramatic. Husband. That word sent a new wave of anger crashing through her. She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. Dramatic? You kidnapped me, Jackson. You forced me into this. You are my wife. His voice was lower now, almost a warning. Something inside her snapped. Without thinking, she raised her hand to slap him the fire in her chest, raging uncontrollably. But she never got the chance. Jackson's reflexes were faster than hers. Before she could even blink, he caught her wrist, twisting her hand gently but firmly until her back hit the wall. Her breath hitched. His other hand came up, pinning both of her wrists above her head. His body was close, too close. His scent, dark and intoxicating, wrapping around her like silk. Her heart pounded in her ears, her lips parting in shock. Let me go, she demanded, but her voice wasn't as steady as she wanted it to be. Jackson's eyes darkened. You really don't get it, do you? He murmured, his grip firm but not painful. You belong to me, Ruby. And then before she could protest, before he could even stop himself, he kissed her. It wasn't soft, it was rough, heated, possessive. Ruby struggled at first, her mind screaming at her to push him away to fight him. But as his lips moved against hers, demanding and skillful, a traitorous heat spread through her. She didn't understand why her body melted into his, why she craved more, why she hated that she loved it. Her fingers curled into fists, her nails digging into his skin. But instead of pushing him away, she pulled him closer. He growled softly against her lips, deepening the kiss, his hands still holding her captive. The way he kissed her, like he had waited for this moment forever, made her chest tighten. She didn't know how long they stood there, tangled in something neither of them could explain. But when he finally pulled away, leaving her breathless, a shiver ran down her spine. She stared at him, mortified. She had been mad at him, livid. So why hadn't she resisted? Why had she wanted it? Swallowing hard, she met his gaze and forced her voice to be firm. Never do that again. Jackson didn't say anything. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. Then after what felt like forever, he finally spoke. Pack your bags, he said simply. She frowned, confused by the sudden shift. What? We're leaving for Lagos tomorrow. His voice was calm, as if the moment they had just shared meant nothing to him. Your brother is getting married. Ruby's heart clenched at the mention of Sean. She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. I don't have a brother. I'm not going. Jackson's jaw ticked, his patience clearly running thin. You will go, even if I have to drag you there in your PJs. Ruby glared at him, her anger bubbling back to the surface. Try me, Jackson smirked. I'd love to. The flight back to Lagos was silent, thick with tension. Ruby didn't speak to Jackson, and he didn't force her to, but she could feel his presence, commanding, unyielding, as if he was letting her think she had a choice, when in reality, she had none. When they arrived at the mansion, everything was already set for the wedding. Jackson had made every service available: makeup, hair, a personal stylist. She hadn't asked for it, but as always, he had planned ahead. After the makeup artist finished, Ruby sat in front of the mirror staring at herself. She looked flawless, but it wasn't enough to distract her from what was really happening. She was about to see them again. Her family. The people who had betrayed her. And so, instead of wearing the elegant but simple dress Jackson had chosen, she reached for something grander. A white floor-length gown, delicate yet dramatic, resembling a wedding dress. If she was going to be forced to attend, she would make sure all eyes were on her. When Jackson stepped into the room and saw her, his lips curled slightly in amusement. Dressed beautifully for someone who didn't want to attend her brother's wedding? Ruby met his gaze in the mirror, adjusting her earrings. Remember you said you'd drag me there? She shrugged. What can I do? Jackson chuckled. Trying to steal the show from the bride is quite funny. She turned and gave him a blank. I don't care a look. He only smirked. When they arrived at the wedding, every head turned toward her. Ruby didn't care. She kept her head high, walking elegantly beside Jackson as if she owned the entire event. She could feel the whispers. Why is she here? After everything, she still came? She looks more like the bride than the actual bride. Her family approached her, her mother, her father, even Sean. But she ignored them completely, pretending they didn't exist. The ceremony was going smoothly. The guests settled down, the music softened, and the wedding host took the mic. And now, let's welcome the bride. Ruby stood up. The entire hall went silent. Hello, everyone, she said sweetly, her voice carrying through the microphone she had just taken from the host. You know, Jackson and I never really said our vows. Murmurs erupted. Jackson arched a brow, but his amusement was unmistakable. Ruby continued, her smile dripping with vengeance. And my dear brother was so kind to let us say ours before his wedding proceeds. Her parents stiffened in their seats, their faces dark with anger. Sean, however, was fuming, his fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tight as he glared at her. But Ruby didn't care. She turned to Jackson, expecting him to deny the spectacle she was causing. Instead, he calmly stood up, walked over to her, and joined her on stage. The entire crowd gasped. And then, just like that, they said their vows. Ruby smiled, but it wasn't a smile of joy. It was defeat. She had thought she was ruining their day, that she was taking back control. But as she slipped the ring on her finger and Jackson looked at her with that victorious smirk, she realized the truth. She hadn't won. She had played right into his hands. The drive home was painfully silent. Ruby sat in the passenger seat, staring out of the window, her hands clenched in her lap. She had wanted to humiliate her family. Instead, she had solidified her marriage to Jackson Okafor in front of hundreds of people. Now she wasn't just the woman forced into marriage. She was officially his wife. And the worst part? She didn't know how to feel about it anymore. Ruby woke up feeling empty. The weight of everything settled on her chest, suffocating her. She had played herself last night. In her attempt to humiliate her family, she had only cemented her marriage to Jackson Okafor. She was truly his now. Needing fresh air, she forced herself out of bed and took a long shower, letting the water wash away her emotions. When she stepped out, she dried her skin, applied light makeup, and slipped into a silk dress that clung perfectly to her body. She looked flawless, like a goddess, like a woman who had control over her own life, even if it was a lie. She didn't bother telling Jackson where she was going. She walked through the living room, her heels clicking against the marble floor, her head high as she reached the main entrance. But when she got to the gate, the guards didn't move. "Open the gate," she ordered, her voice sharp. They hesitated, exchanging nervous glances. "I said open it," she snapped. One of them swallowed hard before replying. "Mr. Okafor instructed us not to let you leave without a driver, ma'am." Ruby froze. Then without another word, she turned on her heels and stormed back inside, her rage exploding. "Jackson!" she screamed as she marched toward his office. "Let me out!" She pushed the doors open, finding him sitting at his desk, calm as ever, like he hadn't just caged her. He looked up lazily. "What is it, wife?" She clenched her fists. "I want to go out. Alone." Jackson leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You want air?" His lips curled into a smirk. "Fine, but only if one of the drivers takes you." Her body tensed with anger. She hated that he controlled her so effortlessly. She hated that he spoke like she belonged to him. Most of all, she hated that he was winning. With an exhausted sigh, she gave up. "Fine." Ruby arrived at one of Lagos's biggest lounges, choosing a secluded booth. She ordered a mojito, needing something to take the edge off. She sat alone, sipping slowly, watching the crowd. Then a man approached. He was handsome, well-dressed, and confident. She could feel Jackson's guards watching from a distance, but that only made her decision easier. If Jackson wanted to cage her, she would show him that she couldn't be tamed. So she flirted. She laughed. She touched the man's arm lightly. She made sure the guards saw everything, and just as she expected, news reached Jackson before she even got home. The moment she stepped into the mansion, she kicked off her heels and made her way upstairs, relieved to finally be in her own space. She wanted to change and sleep off this night. But just as she sat on the bed to remove her earrings, the door opened. Jackson walked in. He didn't say a word. He just looked at her. Ruby's heart slammed against her ribs, but she lifted her chin, refusing to show fear. Before she could react, he moved. In one swift motion, he climbed onto the bed and pinned her beneath him, his strong arms trapping her in place. Her breath hitched. "Where have you been, wife?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. She struggled against him, but he was immovable. "Let me go, Jackson!" "Look at me," he ordered. She refused. Then she felt it, his fingers on her wrists squeezing lightly. Not enough to hurt, but enough to remind her who was in control. "You make me worry," he murmured, his lips inches from hers. "You ignore my calls? And you flirt with other men?" Ruby's chest rose and fell rapidly. "You want to be punished, wife?" Before she could speak, his lips crashed against hers. It wasn't a soft kiss. It was possessive claiming. His fingers tangled in hers, pinning her hands above her head as his lips moved against hers, slow and deliberate. A shiver rushed down her spine. She hated this. She hated that she didn't want him to stop. Her body betrayed her, melting into him, her breath hitching as he deepened the kiss. When he finally pulled away, she was dazed, breathless, furious. She had let him win again. Jackson studied her for a moment, then smirked as if he knew exactly what she was thinking. Ruby's rage reignited. Without thinking, she grabbed the nearest pillow and threw it at him. He caught it effortlessly, laughing under his breath as he strolled out of the bedroom like he owned her. And the worst part? He did. Ruby had gone to the garden seeking peace, but what she found instead shattered everything she thought she knew. She had been trying to escape the storm inside her head. Jackson's dominance, her tangled emotions, the unbearable weight of being trapped in a marriage she never wanted. She thought fresh air and a book would help clear her thoughts. She was wrong. As she strolled through the garden, her eyes flickered to the shaded patio at the far end. Jackson was there, seated in one of the outdoor lounges, a glass of whiskey in hand. But he wasn't alone. The regal woman seated across from him, dressed in a deep emerald gown, radiated presence. Mrs. Mabel Okafor. Ruby had never officially met Jackson's mother, but she had heard enough about her to recognize the resemblance instantly. The same sharp features, the same air of power. She was about to turn back, not wanting to intrude, when she heard Mrs. Mabel speak. "So now that she's your wife," the woman said smoothly, "has she learned to love you yet?" Ruby froze. Her fingers instinctively tightened around the book in her hands, her heart slamming against her ribs. Jackson exhaled deeply, running a hand down his face. He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable, but the exhaustion in his posture was evident. "I'm trying," he admitted, voice quiet but raw. "I've done everything, but she hates me." Ruby's breath caught in her throat. She expected his usual arrogance, his unshakable confidence. But there was none of that here. Just exhaustion, defeat. "I'm running out of patience, Mom," he continued. "I can't keep watching her be this unhappy. Maybe I should let her go." The words hit her like a slap. He wanted to let her go? Mrs. Mabel studied her son carefully. "Do you love her?" Jackson didn't even hesitate. "Yes." Ruby's body stiffened. "I loved her the first day I saw her at her father's mansion," Jackson admitted, his voice quiet, almost as if he was confessing something to himself. "She didn't even know I was there for business. She wasn't trying to impress me. She was just herself." He let out a small, humorless chuckle. "She was kind to her staff. She laughed easily. And she was the most breathtaking woman I had ever seen." Ruby's mind reeled. He had seen her before? She had no idea. Mrs. Mabel sighed, reaching out to take her son's hand. "And when her father came to you, begging for protection?" Jackson's face darkened. "I could have hidden her, sent her abroad, given her some fake identity. But I didn't want to just protect her." He shook his head. "I wanted her. I thought if she was mine, I could make her love me." His voice turned bitter. "But now I know I can't." Ruby's stomach twisted painfully. Mrs. Mabel nodded, her voice firm but laced with sadness. "You gave up so much to be with her, Jackson." He let out a slow breath, nodding. "I did." Ruby pressed a hand to her chest, her heartbeat erratic. What did he give up, she whispered to herself. And as if the universe was answering her silent question, Mrs. Mabel's next words hit her like a sledgehammer. "You stopped supplying crude oil to 5 states, his mother reminded him. "You let your rivals take over that market, all to keep her family safe." Ruby's blood ran cold. She thought she had misheard. She thought she was imagining things. But no, Mrs. Mabel kept going. "You let them push you out of your own business, Jackson. You sacrificed a fortune. You let people believe you had grown weak all because you wanted to keep Ruby and her family alive." Ruby felt her knees buckle. She clung to the tree for support, her entire world shifting around her. Jackson was silent for a long time before he spoke again. "I don't care about the money," he said simply. "I don't care about the business." His voice dropped lower. "But I hate watching her look at me like I'm her worst nightmare." Mrs. Mabel exhaled slowly. "You can't force love, son. If you think letting her go is the right thing to do, then do it." Silence. Ruby couldn't breathe. She had spent months believing Jackson was just owning her, that he was nothing more than a controlling, possessive man who wanted her as a trophy. But all this time, he had been protecting her. He had been sacrificing for her. He had been losing everything for her. And she had hated him for it. Her mind spun, her heart caught in a whirlwind of emotions she didn't understand. What had she done? She turned to leave, desperate to process this. But in her panic, she stepped on a twig. Snap! Jackson's head lifted sharply, his gaze locking onto hers instantly. Ruby froze. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mrs. Mabel turned, her eyes cool but curious. "Well," she murmured, standing gracefully, "it seems you've had an audience." Jackson didn't move. He just stared at Ruby, his expression unreadable. But his eyes, his dark, intense eyes, held something deeper, something she wasn't ready to face. Heat rushed to her cheeks. Panic clawed at her throat. She did the only thing she could think of. She ran. She didn't stop until she reached her bedroom, slamming the door behind her, her breath ragged, her heart slamming against her ribs. She pressed her hands to her temples, shaking her head. Jackson loved her. He had always loved her. He had suffered for her, and no one had told her. A deep ache settled in her chest, twisting her insides in ways she couldn't explain. because for the first time since she had been forced into this marriage, she didn't know how to feel anymore. Ruby sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers tangled together, her mind still spinning. She had been running from Jackson for so long, fighting him, hating him, resenting him. But now, after everything she had learned, after hearing the truth with her own ears, she didn't know what to feel anymore. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. She knew who it was. She didn't tell him to leave. The door opened slowly, and Jackson stepped inside, his movements slow, hesitant. So unlike the confident, dominant man she had always known. For once, he seemed unsure. He leaned against the door for a moment, his piercing dark eyes searching hers. "Are you okay?" His voice was softer than she had ever heard it. Ruby inhaled deeply. "No," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson let out a breath, then walked further into the room. He didn't say anything, just waited. "Tell me everything," she finally said. He didn't hesitate. For the next several minutes, Jackson told her the entire truth. How her father had come to him, begging for protection. How the people he owed weren't just dangerous, but ruthless killers. He told her how he had cut ties with major businesses, lost influence, and risked his entire empire just to ensure she and her family would be untouchable. "I never wanted to force you into anything," he said, his voice low but steady. "I thought, maybe if you were mine, I could make you love me. But I was wrong." Ruby's throat tightened. She had been so blind she had spent months resenting him, when all along he had been fighting battles for her behind the scenes, sacrificing more than she could ever understand. She clenched her hands into fists, trying to control the emotions swelling inside her. "I should have known," she whispered. You should have told me." Jackson exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Would you have listened?" Ruby paused. "Would she have?" She sighed, closing her eyes for a moment. I had the right to know." Jackson nodded. "I know." Silence filled the space between them, but it wasn't heavy with tension like before. It was different, warmer, more fragile. Her fingers trembled as she finally looked up at him. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice shaking. Jackson stilled. She took a shaky breath. "I don't know when it happened, but I can't stop thinking about you." She swallowed, her pulse racing. "I was so busy pushing you away, I didn't realize that She stopped herself, her heart pounding. Jackson's eyes darkened with something unreadable. "That you what?" She hesitated, but she couldn't lie anymore. "I think I'm falling for you." The air in the room shifted. Something snapped between them. Before she could even blink, Jackson closed the distance between them, his hands cradling her face as his lips crashed against hers. It wasn't like their previous kisses. This was raw, desperate, like he had been starving for her, and now he finally had a taste. Ruby whimpered against his lips, her hands clutching his shirt, pulling him closer instead of pushing him away. Every thought, every doubt melted as his tongue slid against hers, claiming her in a way that sent shivers down her spine. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Everything I did," he murmured, his forehead resting against hers, "was because I love you. And you don't have to stay, Ruby. You don't have to love me back. You're free." Tears pricked her eyes. He was giving her an out. She could leave, but instead of answering, she moved first. She kissed him again, harder, deeper, pouring every unspoken emotion into the way her lips moved against his. Jackson groaned, lifting her effortlessly and carrying her toward the bed. He laid her down gently, his hands skimming down her sides, memorizing every inch of her. He leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear. "Tell me you want this," he whispered. Ruby's breath hitched. She had never done this before, never been with a man, but she had never wanted anything more. "I do," she whispered back. "I want you, that was all it took." Jackson kissed her again, slow and deep, as he tangled his fingers with hers, pinning her hands above her head as he claimed her. He was slow, patient. His touch was reverent, his movements careful. He knew she had never done this before, and he treated her like she was something sacred. He worshipped her, and with every stroke, every whisper of his name against her lips, he made her his completely, entirely, irrevocably. As he moved above her, inside her, he whispered against her skin, "You belong to me, Ruby." And for the first time, she didn't fight it. Ruby woke up to the feeling of strong arms wrapped around her, holding her close. The early morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains, casting a golden glow over the room. For a moment she stayed still, her body tangled with Jackson's, her head resting against his bare chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Everything had changed. She was no longer fighting him. She no longer felt trapped, because now she understood. Jackson shifted beside her, his fingers trailing lazily up and down her back. He was awake, watching her with that unreadable expression of his. "Are you thinking about running again, wife?" he murmured, his deep voice thick with sleep. Ruby smirked, tilting her head up to look at him. "No," she whispered, "not anymore." Jackson's eyes darkened with something deeper than possession, something like love. She traced small circles on his chest, her heart full and steady. "You were right," she admitted. "I never wanted to see the truth." Jackson cupped her face, his thumb brushing against her lips. "And now?" She inhaled deeply. "Now, I just want to be yours." A slow, knowing smile spread across his lips. "You already are." He kissed her again, slow and deep, sealing the truth between them. This wasn't about ownership anymore. This was home. 1 year later, the Okafor mansion was filled with music and laughter. Guests dressed in the finest attires moved about, raising glasses of champagne, celebrating the union that had once started in chaos. But now it was real. Ruby stood by the balcony, a gentle breeze lifting the hem of her ivory gown. Jackson approached her from behind, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her into him. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Okafor," he whispered into her ear, pressing a kiss to the side of her neck. Ruby smiled, leaning into him. "I never thought I'd be happy about that name," she teased. Jackson turned her around to face him, his gaze filled with something unbreakable. "You changed everything, Ruby. You changed me." She cupped his face, staring into the eyes of the man who had once been her greatest fear, but now he was her greatest love. "You never forced me to love you, Jackson," she whispered. "You just never gave up on me." He smirked, tilting her chin up. "Because I knew you were mine." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "And I knew you were mine too." Jackson kissed her deeply as the fireworks lit up the Lagos night sky, sealing the love story that had been built on power, sacrifice, and something neither of them had expected: forever. The end.